Hello, my name is Franzi Schmidt, and I'm an assistant professor of marketing at the College of Business here at OSU. And I have been here at OSU since September, so I'm relatively new, but I've received a very warm welcome, and it's really been a great environment to work in, to live in, and so very excited to share some of the research that I do and talk about what motivates me, and also why I think the research I do is important. So to start out, I'm sure that all of you have some idea about what marketing is, but I'm not so sure how many of you know about current practices that companies currently do. So my goal is to share some insights with you about how marketing organizations gather and analyze data by using the relationships with stakeholders that they have, and then to use that information to make strategic decisions. So I would like to go into detail about how these different stakeholder relationships can be utilized with something called social network analysis. Now, historically, many firms have been following an approach that's called inside-out marketing. And what that means is that firms utilize internal firm resources to then achieve competitive advantage and make decisions based on that. And so to give you an example, in other words, what that means is that they use a product-centric approach. And a product-centric approach is to start the process to create value for a customer by developing the product first. So a firm develops a product and then tries to get it out into the market. Now, more recently, companies have been following this other approach called outside-in marketing. And outside-in marketing focuses on external relationships in the beginning of this value creation process for customers. In other words, compared to the product-centric approach, this is called customer-centric approach. So what that means is that the customer is at the heart of the value creation process. And firms will conduct a thorough analysis of what customer demands and customer needs are and what the market needs before then developing and launching a product. So you have the product-centric, which is really starting with the product and then trying to understand what customer needs are, and the customer-centric, where you start with the customer. And so now many of you have heard probably at some point of the 4 Ps of marketing. And the 4 Ps stand for product, which means which type of product is being sold. Place, which talks about or is basically the decision of where to sell the product. And then also price. So what is the price of the product? And the 4th P is promotion. So where is the product being advertised and how is the product being advertised? Now, with the customer-centric approach, it is not as important to answer all of these 4 Ps first in the beginning of this value creation process, but you want to look at the customers, the company, and the competitors for information. And so one good company example here is General Motors. And GM actually, in 2009, changed their approach from inside marketing to outside marketing, where they really tried to create a beneficial customer experience and try to understand what do our customers actually need and how do they go through the buying process for our products. And by understanding their customers better, they were able to create a better experience for customers and increase their sales. Now, you probably might be wondering, well, this all sounds great, but how does a company get all of this information that they need to create this customer-centric perspective? Now, to effectively apply this outside-in marketing perspective, firms do need certain resources. And very often, the answer for what resources are needed comes down to data availability. So marketing managers can collect data from different stakeholders, internal and external to the firm. So for example, data can be collected from salespeople or other employees. They can also collect data from existing customers based on past purchasing data. So what that means, they can look at when did a customer make a purchase, what kind of purchase was made, what product was bought. Data marketing managers can also get data from social media platforms nowadays to understand brand communities better, or even shareholders, just to name a few of the different stakeholders. Now, besides just looking at how much was sold or which customer bought what, analyzing these relationships between stakeholders actually also provides a lot of insightful data for companies. Now, to better understand this type of data, I'm going to go through who are stakeholders and who are these stakeholder groups that I've been talking about. Well, stakeholders are a part of a company's or firm's ecosystem. And without these stakeholders, the company couldn't function. Now, especially with the rise of social media, it can be very beneficial to understand how information gets shared among customers and what the reach of this type of information is. Now, for example, you can understand if a new product is launched, how does it get shared, who adopts it first, and then who follows in this adoption process. But offline relationships are also very important. For example, there can be data sharing among employees that can take place. And if you really think about it, relationships and connections are all around us, not just in the workplace. So we all have relationships at work. We all have relationships with friends. We have relationships with our families. So really, we are all part of these different social networks. And so I would actually like for you to just take a quick second, a few seconds to think about what are the different networks in your life and how have you maybe benefited from the social networks that you have. Okay, so I hope you were able to think of the relationships that you have and the connections that you've made throughout your life and have been able to think about how it has benefited you. Maybe you were able to get important information at work. Maybe you got a referral to maybe a doctor, or maybe you helped a family friend out with something just because you were connected to them. So what I would next like to talk about is why are these relationships important for companies and what kind of data and information can companies extract from these relationships. One thing that companies can gather from this data about these networks is what we call them, social networks, which is a set of individuals that have relations with one another. And what this data can do is that network data can highlight influential individuals in a network. It can show how strongly actors within the network are connected. And you can figure out how information flows within a network, what kind of information flows, and who can access that information. So considering a company's network from this outside-in marketing perspective means to look at the network ties that that company has with its stakeholders and recognize that value that each of these stakeholders brings to the firm. And by studying these networks, we can then better understand behaviors of people that the company is connected with, and also the systems that these people are a part of. So I want to tell you and share with you how it works to analyze a network of people. And there's actually a whole field of study around studying social networks, which is called social network analysis. And this field and social network analysis provides insights into, as I briefly mentioned before, information flows within a network, what type of information flows, and who facilitates the flow of information. So it really can be a very powerful tool to understand decision-making at a company, the adoption of products and ideas, and also the capabilities that people have based on who they're connected with. Now, some of the most famous social networks research, I would say, is by a researcher called Mark Granovetter. And Mark Granovetter is a sociology professor at Stanford, and he conducted this study in the 1970s. And his research has the title, The Strength of Weak Ties. And what he did is that he conducted a study outside of Boston and surveyed 280 workers. And what he found is that 56% of the workers that he surveyed got their job through one of their contacts. So that's one of the questions he asked: how were you able to get the current position that you're in? And so the finding was that more than half of the people got their job through one of their contacts. Now, today, this might not be surprising to you because we understand that a lot of jobs are heard about or from a network, and networking can be very powerful. But what was even more interesting about this research is that the majority of managers got their job through contacts that they only saw occasionally or rarely. So what Granovetter found is that even though we might spend more time with connections that are called strong ties, so people that we spend a lot of time with and people that we share a lot of similar connections with, so we have a lot of the same friends, but those strong ties won't help us get jobs. The people that help us get jobs are weak ties, so people we only rarely and occasionally interact with, because when looking for a job, we are looking for novel information and not overlapping information that we might get from our friends. So if we talk to one friend, we probably get similar information than from another friend that we're really close with. But these weak ties give us access to novel information that we haven't potentially heard of before. And so in marketing research, social network analysis has also been used for many years. And specifically, some of the stakeholder networks that have been analyzed are customer networks. So for instance, how do new products diffuse, meaning what is the path to product adoption? How quickly do products get adapted? Or other stakeholder networks that have been analyzed are employee networks within a firm. So for example, how does information transfer between different departments, for example? And now to help you understand what some of these applications of social network analysis or stakeholder analysis are, I would like to walk you through some of the research that I'm currently doing on a stakeholder network. And very broadly speaking, what I was interested in and curious about is how do salespeople at business-to-business companies make decisions when it comes to selling products, and what helps them be more successful. And one of the reasons why I was so interested in this is because I knew from my work experience as a brand manager, there is a lot of informal communication that takes place among salespeople. And so I thought there must be value that can be extracted from these relationships, from these networks. So I wanted to dig a little deeper into social network connections among salespeople to understand their individual selling success. Now, to answer this question, I used data that let me identify network connections based on whether salespeople have sold to the same customer before in the past. And in this graph here, you see the whole network of the salespeople at this business-to-business company. And each dot that you see is a salesperson, and the color of the dot indicates the number of connections that salesperson has. So here we see 1,285 dots, and we see that people in the center have a lot of connections, and people on the periphery, on the outside of the network, have fewer connections. So we kind of see very easily from this graph who are the people that are very strongly connected among other salespeople. Now the lines show the connections. So whenever there's a line, that salesperson knows the other salesperson. And so I was really interested in examining how salespeople get access to new information about customers they have not worked with before, because that is a very challenging thing to sell to a customer where you don't have a lot of information. Now, one of the answers is how do salespeople get information is through other salespeople. So I wanted to measure this network and understand who is better connected than other salespeople. So to measure whether salespeople have access to novel information and which salespeople have the most access, I measure something called betweenness centrality. And the name of this measure partially gives away what it measures, which is whether a person is between two other people, or rather how often is someone connecting to other people. And what this means is that the person has access to information from multiple sources. So we can walk through an example. So if we take Pam from the TV show The Office, which I hope most of you are familiar with, and if we say that Pam has been working there for a while, so Pam knows Dwight, who is a salesperson at Dunder Mifflin, and then let's assume that Jim just joined the company Dunder Mifflin. So Pam knows Dwight and Jim, but Jim doesn't know Dwight yet. Then Pam has a higher betweenness centrality because she is connecting Jim and Dwight. So she is on the path connecting those two salespeople. And she is able to get information from Dwight and from Jim. And so I did that for all of the salespeople in this company. And what I found is that salespeople with a stronger betweenness centrality perform better at selling overall, and they especially perform better and are better at selling products that need novel types of information. So some of the recommendations that I give to managers is to take networking opportunities seriously and take relationship building among salespeople seriously, and really support network building. So one way would be to pair inexperienced salespeople with well-connected salespeople for onboarding purposes or other trainings. And it might also be beneficial to offer networking events so weak ties can develop to encourage and really strengthen that information sharing of novel information. And especially if people don't work in the same physical location, it might be more difficult to build these connections. So having these networking opportunities really helps salespeople make these connections. So I hope that this example helped clarify what it means to examine one type of stakeholder networks. In this example, an employee network of salespeople at a business-to-business company. And I also hope that this helped you understand how your networks have given you opportunities potentially, and also what kind of networks that you are a part of. And I think that because we are all connected to other people, I mean, on a daily basis, we engage with other people, and all of these relationships influence us in some way. That's why I think that analyzing social networks, and specifically in marketing, analyzing stakeholder networks, is a really powerful way to understand behaviors of, for example, customers or employees, suppliers, shareholders, and also brand communities. Now, some interesting questions that could be answered with future research are, how do we define high strength in a digital age? Is it really still the amount of interactions, the frequency of interactions, or are there other things that play a role? Additionally, it might be interesting to identify what kind of position does a firm have in their own network with different stakeholders or even among other firms? So how influential are they? And one example of a company that has used social network analysis is Cigna, the health insurance company. And they wanted to figure out who are the influential people in their company. And they surveyed 200 managers around the world and found out that actually the people that they thought were influential were not influential. So they surveyed managers based on who they're connected with. Then they ran their data through a social network analysis tool and figured out that people that were in some of these roles actually didn't have that much influence. And the finding kind of was that a lot of times companies are wrong at about 75% of the people that they think are influential aren't actually as influential. So conducting this analysis can have a lot of good insights for companies. Now, one big thing that I would like to see in the future is more work to make these tools more accessible and easier to use for companies. Now, again, also with big data being a really big topic and more data accessibility these days, the analysis of more novel types of stakeholders might be possible. So for example, one important thing to understand might be who are the customers that make referrals. And those hold a lot of value for companies. Now, with social media data, that could be one way to understand these referral networks and understand who is the person that actually refers the company the most. I also think that there could be more applications outside of the already researched context. So for example, it would be really beneficial to analyze donors instead of customers to understand nonprofit management a little bit better. And it would also be interesting to understand social network connections at companies in emerging markets. Are the network structures the same as in more developed countries? And are the influential positions the same? Do they have the same meaning? So those are things that I think hold a lot of potential, and that's really where I'm hoping the trend of social network analysis will be going. Now, I really don't expect anyone here to be an expert in analyzing any social networks after this talk, but I hope that this talk gave you some ideas about how your own social networks can benefit you and how you can help your network benefit from you as a connection, and also how your social networks in the workplace can help you get information and how you can provide information for your employees or your coworkers and make better decisions and provide insights into the different behaviors. So I hope you enjoyed the talk and took away some meaningful information.